couple minutes late, but
she's coming.
she's coming. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Whoa, that is really loud. Okay. You don't need to hold it right here. Good afternoon. Welcome to the last breakout session of the day. My name is Peter Osborne. I'm the Director of Educational Services at the Maine Municipal Association. For those of you unfamiliar with MMA, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan member service organization serving Maine's towns and cities and the people who work in them. And I'm very excited to be joined by several amazing municipal officials from across the state. How many municipal folks we got in the room here today? 2, 3, 4. Well, you all at least live in a municipality unless you're in an unorganized territory. So there's some vested interest here. Before we launch into our panel discussion, I do want to introduce Ambassador Molly and Bryant of the Penobscot Nation to offer some remarks and offer us a little bit of the Wabanaki perspective on community inclusion in the Wabanaki homeland. Ambassador Bryant was first elected to the Penobscot Nation Tribal Council in 2016 and was appointed as, I believe, the first tribal ambassador in 2017. Excellent. And in the role of tribal ambassador, she advocates for policy change and offers the Wabanaki and Indigenous perspectives on issues that are important to our entire state, ranging from land use, water rights, and tribal sovereignty to violence against Native American women, the eradication of the use of Native American mascots. And I believe you were pretty pivotal in the act that actually banned those mascots in the state. So thank you for that. And also was fairly pivotal in advancing the recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day in the state of Maine. She's a graduate of the University of Maine and is a Margaret Chase Smith Public Policy Scholar. And we're very, very grateful to have you here with us today, Ambassador Bryant.
Thank you so much. Oh, that is a great microphone. And I'll sit right here. Can everybody see and hear me okay? Awesome. So it's wonderful to be here with you today. It's so nice. I do so much speaking and interacting in government spaces, especially at the State House. So it's really great to feel the energy here and people coming together around something that isn't lawmaking or policy or all of those really great, fun, long processes. So I wanted to bring a little bit of the history of Wabanaki people here in our homeland, some kind of key things to think about, the issue of tribal sovereignty and kind of what that means and why it's important. And then with all of that knowledge, how do we best interact and go forward together? And it's some of my very favorite things to talk about. So happy to be sharing with you. So when I say Wabanaki, that refers to a historical alliance and confederacy called Schwabanaki, means people of the dawn. So where we are geographically, our people were the first to see the sunrise. And my good friend Dwayne Toma, who I think you all have seen already, he's from the Passamaquoddy people. And I am Penobscot, so those are two of the nations. We also have the Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet, the Wolastoqey, up in northern Maine. So those are the folks that remain federally recognized, which means that our tribes have met a process through the federal government to exist. How nice of them to say we exist. But we've met certain criteria, so we are the federally recognized tribes. There's also Abenaki people. This is their ancestral territory. They were displaced into Canada, and they are recognized there at Odanak and Wolanak nations. So those are what remain of the Wabanaki Confederacy as far as individual tribes. At one point here in our homelands, there were upwards of 25 distinct tribal nations all throughout this land we call Maine. And sometimes people ask me about the significance of a certain place name or mountain or lake. And is this sacred or is this one? And I said, it's all homeland. It's all sacred. People point to Katahdin or different places where we historically pray or gather, but really, if you look across all of this land, this all was, stewarded by our ancestors. So it's all sacred. And thinking about land acknowledgements that are so key and so in right now. I love it when there's a land acknowledgement that's followed by a comma, not a period. I think it's so important to not just acknowledge, but then deepen the relationship. So that's why I'm excited to be here today, because this feels like a deepening of that acknowledgement. So when I think about the important things to mention in this history here, I never want to get bogged down in sort of the traumatic or the sad or the things that might make us feel anger or guilt or confusion, but it's important to talk about where we come from because that influences where we all are. So I was really thankful to be involved with the Upstander Academy, the folks that did the documentary Dawnland about the taking of Indigenous children through the foster care system, also mentions the residential school and boarding school systems. So we got together and did a follow-up called Bounty. And I don't know if anybody's seen Bounty. It's a really, yay, it's a really quick film, about 7 minutes. And what we did was Penobscot families. I did it with my older two daughters. I had a whole other daughter since we filmed it. So my older two daughters and then two other families, we all sat in the old state house in Boston. And in that room in the 1700s, a proclamation was set forth. The government was calling on colonists to go hunt and murder Penobscot people and turn in their scalps as the proof of killing. So we think about this as, oh, that's evil. How could anybody do that? That's an act of genocide. That's wrong. I like to think about the circumstances of that time, and it's a great way to conceptualize evilness throughout history and what drives humans to treat other humans this way. And there's a power dynamic and there's colonization. At this point in our history, there were people starving through long winters. And the price of these Penobscot bodies and deaths for a male Penobscot, it would be 50 pounds, which is like $11,000 in our money today. So the government was sanctioning the killing of our people. So we read this document with our children on film. It's a great little movie, not a happy movie, but a powerful one and really empowering for our kids. But I like to bring that up because that happened right here. So when you have these touch points in history that we look to that are well documented, that we kind of feel all the time, I think it's important to understand that and feel that as we look to where we are today. And throughout history, these bounties and these wars and the colonization, so much of it had to do with land. And that ties back to these land acknowledgements. Fast forward to 1980, we have this landmark settlement between the tribes and the state government and the federal government. And that's the basis of a lot of the work I do today. So in 1980, we have the Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement Act and implementing acts, which came about because the tribes discovered, the Passamaquoddy tribe figured it out first. Good job, Dwayne. They discovered that roughly 2/3 of the state of Maine had been illegally taken from the tribes. The treaties were never ratified by their federal government. So I wasn't around in the 1970s, but I hear it was this very tense, confusing, chaotic, racist, very chaotic time between the state and the tribal nations as they tried to settle this lawsuit and figure it out. So the tribes and the federal government sued the state of Maine. What resulted was this agreement that hasn't worked well for the tribes. And it's very much the basis of so much of the work we're trying to do for tribal sovereignty. So the state came into these negotiations as the party in the wrong, and they were able to come out of it not spending any money as far as, in the settlement. That was all federal dollars and methods for the tribes to get back land to put into federal trust. But the state negotiators also very, cleverly devised this language in the act that prevented the tribes in Maine from having access to federal beneficial Indian laws, as well as a lot of jurisdictional control. So we've been dealing with the oppressive nature of this act since 1980. And a lot of times people say, well, why would you ever agree to that? If it was so wrong, if the writing was on the wall, if you were gambling away your sovereignty for this settlement, why would you all do that? And shouldn't you just live with the consequences of that decision? So I like to point back to this, cascade of traumatic history and taking and theft. When you start with the hunting of our people, you come to the taking of our children, the taking of the land. You have whole communities of people who have been suffering and trying to rebuild for generations. And that absolutely doesn't happen overnight. So I don't begrudge our leaders in 1980 for looking at this and thinking, well, we might as well get something when we've been living with nothing. And they were told that we could come back and change it in the future. So the future is now. And so much of the kind of relationships and dynamics and way we live with each other is based on a lot of the framework that was set about in that 1980 act. So the tribes in Maine, because of this law, are treated very differently from tribes across the country. And the legislature has came together in 2019 and put together a task force. So in 2019, we had a Democrat in the Blaine House, Governor Janet Mills. We had Democrats that taking control of the House of Senate and House and Senate. So we had a lot of friends approaching us like, what are we going to do? We got to repeal the act. We got to change it this way. We got to do this. And the governor had been the attorney general and had presented a lot of arguments against tribal sovereignty in her role as attorney general. And she had, promised to wear a different hat as governor, look at it with fresh eyes, and work with us on things we could work on. We've gotten some great things done with the governor. We've run into some roadblocks on other things. So this task force that was convened in 2019 was probably, in my recollection, the greatest collaboration between the tribes and the state as far as moving forward in a good way and understanding each other and trying to amend this agreement. And that task force produced a slate of recommendations around amending the 1980 Act. And we've gotten some of those things passed. We've fallen short with others. But that really is the climate that the tribes and the state are in right now. And I think it really bleeds into, that's all kind of the policy level and what happens in the state house. But I think it bleeds into a lot of our relationships around the state. People say, people who live in kind of the world of stereotypes and scarcity will say, well, you guys should be happy with what you got. You're always coming back begging for more. So there's a lot of education and advocacy to be done in a lot of these corners of our state that we share. And I'm glad we mentioned the two bills I'm so proud of, the two laws, the banning of the mascots and changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, because those have really set the table for so many of these really good, meaty policy discussions. Some folks will say, well, those are just symbolic things. What are you actually going to do that, for the day-to-day lives of your people? But when you aren't sitting in a room and considered equals with folks, you aren't going to get much done for real life stuff. So those are very, very real to me. I've seen such a shift in the state once we did away with those mascots, once we shifted from, celebrating the genocide of our ancestors to acknowledging and celebrating the contributions of our people since time immemorial. I've seen such a great shift in Maine with those, symbolic measures that really have a huge impact on equity and justice and all those sort of things. And in conclusion, I also co-chair the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations. I co-chair that with Speaker Rachel Talbot Ross and Councillor Yakubaga as a commissioner. So through that work, I've been able to see, it's really broadened my horizons on, we do have tribal people sort of fighting these good fights and trying to advance good policy, but there's so many other folks who are marginalized across our homelands, and so many other folks who have been silenced and kind of kept out of these important rooms where decisions are being made. So I really have felt a shift in that work as well, where people are showing up, people are being allies, and people are identifying the populations that really need to be heard. And we're starting to understand that none of us can really make progress if the most vulnerable in our communities are falling behind. So this energy that I feel at this conference and some of the key themes go a really long way, I think, towards meeting that mission, listening to those voices often silenced. And I think that's such a huge part of how we go forward together. So I'll stay up here if anything comes up about sovereignty or Wabanaki issues. I would love to contribute more. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ambassador Bryant, and please do feel free to jump in as you feel compelled. Give you a microphone to share down here. So you all didn't come here to listen to me talk. So in the interest of being a good facilitator, I'm going to try and speak as little as possible. And but I'm really very honored to have been asked to facilitate this conversation around community inclusion and offer some municipal perspectives on the issue. And I think it is important to have gotten some perspective, Ambassador Bryant's perspective on some of the policy issues on a statewide level that are related to inclusion. And my initial reaction to you remarking that some of the critics of these policy changes saying that they're only symbolic, you know, I was thinking that that's a little bit of a privileged position to say that it's just symbolic, right? If you don't feel that that affects you directly, that's a privileged position to come from. So some of these things that get derided as only symbolic changes, it's a matter of perspective. So thanks for offering that. To our panelists, could you please introduce yourselves in whatever way you feel comfortable doing that? And then can I put you on the spot and offer our audience, what's the one thing that you want them to walk away from this conversation with? We're going to front load them with the end goal here. But I did put you on the spot, so you can also pass.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Hugh, and I'm the Director of Economic Opportunity for the City of Portland. I am an immigrant from the Ivory Coast, came here when I was 2, raised down south, so I'm technically a Southerner, and then stayed in Maine for about 12 years, so nobody wants me anymore. I mean, and here we are. So I have a pretty objective lens on municipalities coming from the South and the North, and then being tied into the global wars happening in the Ivory Coast and how, you know, colonization affects these things. I think one thing that I want everyone to leave with in this conversation is how caste systems and class systems affect inclusion when it comes to xenophobia, racial disparities, and equity.
Good morning, everyone. Well, no, it's not morning. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Davine Salingby. I am the DEI specialist for the city of Lewiston. I was born in Congo, but I moved to the United States when I was 5 years old. I lived in St. Albans for the first 10 years of my life, and then I moved to Lewiston. And in that, I just learned that I wanted to give back to my community, seeing how hard my parents worked and how much they sacrificed to bring me here. So I think through my journey, it brought me to be the DEI specialist for the city. And the biggest takeaway I want everyone to take is that we have to continue the work, even with pushback and backlash. If we don't support one another, then a lot of the things that we're working towards can be easily undone.
Okay, my introduction will be less interesting. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. It's an honor to be sitting along with these amazing women, achieving women. So my name is Dina Yaqub Aga from the city of Bangor. I moved to the US 27 years ago, went to Canada for a few years, came back. When we came back to Bangor, I told my husband, 3.5 years, you get the green card and we're out of here. always big city girl, want to be, in Houston, back to Houston where we lived for a few years and enjoying shopping. And anyway, so it 17 years and counting, still in Bangor. Yeah, so I think it's about feeling like you belong. That's what makes it home for you, and that's why I think I stayed in Bangor. Not why I think, I believe that's why I stayed in Bangor. When you put your heart in contributing to this community and you feel like you belong, that's when it becomes home, and that's why I got involved in many nonprofit organizations, went back to school at UMaine, got my master's in social work, and then I ran for public office, and that was a huge challenge. And now I'm on my third year of being a city councilor in Bangor and a program manager for Maine Multicultural Center. And I have been on the job maybe just about 11 months now, and things are growing. One thing that I wanna talk about leaving this room when we leave after we finish this presentation is that achieving equity and inclusion, it is about changing systems. It is about changing ordinances, policies, but I also think about it as changing people's minds and hearts about people who move to our communities, and that to look at them as human beings who contribute positively and who want to be part of our communities. I think by accepting these immigrants as being part of our communities is where we are achieving a few steps towards achieving equity and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm just wowed at being asked to sit at the same table as you all. So you all come from very different communities, right? Portland, Lewiston, Bangor, very different, but you share a lot of similarities. And I think in terms of kind of municipal focus on equity and inclusion efforts, each of your municipalities, it's fair to say, are at different points in that process. But you all of your communities have a long history of welcoming immigrants, folks from diverse backgrounds. So where you sit now, I'd love to get your perspectives on what are some of the factors that are drawing people to your communities right now, and maybe get your thoughts on what are some of the best ways that we can welcome those people to your municipalities. And I don't call on people, so you just gotta.
So, okay, it's back. Yeah. So we have seen baby steps in the city of Bangor towards welcoming immigrants, especially in the last year or so. And I think it's driven by lack of housing in the Portland area. I'm sorry, I can't think of any other reason why we're seeing more immigrants. The bus stops in Bangor. I think if it went north, we'll see more people going north, but definitely the housing problem crisis in the Portland area is driving more immigration to Bangor, which is amazing for us because we need those immigrants. We need their contributions. We need their skills. So what we have seen lately in the past year, we have seen more voluntary immigrants who come as professionals to work at Northern Light, at St. Joe's Hospital, and professors who, and also nurses. We also have seen an increase in professors who come to University of Maine in Orono and Hassan. So their needs are less than refugees or asylum seekers, so they just need to be able to navigate where, housing, where they can find housing, best schools for their children. So that's almost it about this population. And then we have seen an influx in refugees, and that has to do with the federal government who assigns these individuals to the state of Maine. And because of the housing crisis in the Portland area, so they are assigned to be resettled in Bangor. And I can say that most of these individuals who arrived in the past year have obtained employment. They have been so grateful for the opportunities that the Bangor area has offered them. All of them are very grateful. Their children in the school system are enrolled and enjoy it, and they feel appreciated and respected. And it's something that comes as a reward for them after years of displacement. We also work with a third group, which is asylum seekers. And I mean, I don't know, I'm just seeing more of them. I don't know, to be honest with you, why. I don't know. We just work with them. We support them in the process of applying for employment. We are still baby steps. We don't know how things work when it comes to legal system. And by the way, I'm talking here wearing two hats, the city councilor and the program manager at Maine Multicultural Center, just because I have more information as a program manager than as a city councilor. There is not much there yet, baby steps.
I think when it comes to Lewiston, word of mouth is very important because a lot of places, the cost of living is so high or there's not a lot of opportunity. So people gravitate towards Lewiston because they want to, one, give their families a better opportunity, find work, integrate into the community. And I think that we have a reputation for having a lot of the immigrants already established. So in a way, we kind of are setting the standard. I think we're still working on things in terms of how we can make people more comfortable and integrate more. And we're still working on making resources more accessible for everyone. I think that's one of the biggest difficulties with the influx of people coming so far.
I'm Portland. I have the housing crisis. I think that Portland has become a welcoming certified city, which is great. I went to the conference in Dallas with other municipalities from across the nation, and they were just in awe of the resources and the pipeline strategies that we have in Portland. So if you are a janitor working on ways for you to become a front desk worker, working on ways for you to become an admin staff, depending on where you start, that's also engaging. And then we are also vacation land. So it's not just the asylum seekers and the immigrants coming in, but it's historically Black folks getting really curious about what is life like in Portland, Maine, because the representation is there. They can see themselves there in every essence of leadership and the industries and organizations that they work in. So that curiosity is there. And then everybody wants to take a hike these days. And I don't know what the appeal is, but I'm happy it's there. We also, as a city, the counselors are very diverse in representation. So people feel like their voices can be heard, and they feel like somebody is there to represent them in their communities. Economic opportunity plays a vital part just because people tend to go to areas where there is economic mobility. And we provide that at least at the ground level. So if you are an asylum seeker coming in, providing ways or strategies for you to receive your worker's permit, or English language classes are really done well in Portland, and we're always working on ways to refine that. But then we get into the nuances of the work, which is silos and cultural differences. And we make sure that everybody is represented, everybody feels like an individual, but everybody also feels like they're part of a community. And we put out programs and initiatives to do that. So I think those are the very attractive things that people see. And I see in the daily news all the time that Portland keeps mounting up as the #1 destination spot. So it gives me the idea that we're at least doing something right.
Thank you all for those initial perspectives. And many of you, Daveen, you mentioned integration, and Melissa, you were talking about becoming a welcoming certified city, which sounds very cool. So attracting people and welcoming new people to a community is one thing, but in order to have a sustainable, healthy community, you want those people to be invested in to stay and feel as though they're welcome and they belong there. So what are some things from your perspectives that communities can do or be doing to really make new arrivals feel as though this is a place that they're welcomed to stay, they belong there, and that they want to stay?
I think I previously also worked for the city of Lewiston, doing DEI work. And in that time, I found that equity audits for your cities are really impactful. So when I mean equity audits, thinking about transportation infrastructure of your city, social inclusion programs, and representation, and what that looks like to the naked eye and what that looks like in your policies are extremely important. When people tend to migrate here, they're looking for ways to, one, feel included, and that is in childcare services, in the schooling, and food access, and basically basic needs in healthcare as well. So at the lower level, those basic needs have to be there for people to stay, and also housing, but I don't want to talk about that. For people to want to say, once that's provided, you move it up a notch and you talk about the social inclusion efforts. Is the arts represented there? Can your kids go to ballet? Is there a community of families and that network? Is it only workforce? Are we siloing in that way? And once you pick up on those patterns, I think people are more likely to stay in these communities. So pass it to Davina to talk more about Lewiston.
Yes, I agree with Melissa. I think it's about being intentional in the way that you communicate with people, and you can't assume just because people are from a different country, you can use the same methods to get them. Get to know people as individuals in your events, in the way the teachers are teaching, being culturally competent, and utilizing these things and realizing that these people are meant to stay here. You're not just doing an event to check off a box and then never thinking about them again, because people want to make a place a home and they don't want to seem like a quota or a number.
I think for us in the city of Bangor, it's the sense of community is what attracts people to stay in Bangor. So they arrive and then they feel they are welcomed. I have seen it when the first families arrived last year, when we had parents whose children, go to school with the immigrants' kids. They were welcoming them, arranging play dates, hanging out with them, making them feel welcome. Going with them to the library for story time, different activities. I think having a strong school system that welcomes diverse students has been essential for our immigrant population to stay in Bangor. We have established an amazing relationship with the school department, where parents feel they are in charge. They are in charge of their children's education, and they feel they are welcomed and always their needs are met. So this has been a totally new experience for our families who came from displacement. Also, the city of Bangor has implemented a few steps to make housing more affordable. So many ordinances and policies, and that has been very helpful. So we have seen those families, settling, and they feel like, oh yeah, we can have a house, and that's something again they have not had before. It could be maybe refugee camps. So I think the city of Bangor has been able to meet those demands for the new families. Also, I think the partnership between the city of Bangor and Downtown Partnership, which is a nonprofit organization. So we are working on more cultural events. And let me tell you, our new families, they were elated to participate in 4th of July activities. For them, that was a new level of, excitement and getting to know the culture in Bangor, in the US. So this is new to them. Even Halloween, so we had the parents helping the new families, showing them what Halloween is and taking them for apple picking, trick or treat. All of these things are very new. So all of these cultural activities, they help the new families love Bangor, enjoy it and feel like, they are respected and feel dignified. And this is very important. And they always communicate that with us. Also, the University of Maine, we have those events. We have Cultural Fest. And again, our families, they all went there and they enjoyed the diversity, and they felt, oh, like there are people like us. We are not the only one who are diverse. So it was an opportunity for them to see, to experience more diversity in the area. And I bet there will be more and more events as our immigrant community grows. And I'm excited to see more of them arriving to Bangor.
Thank you. I think it's not news to anybody in this room that there's kind of been a resurgence of anti-immigrant rhetoric, xenophobia in this country and in Maine, especially in the past couple of years. Each of your communities have actually, unfortunately, seen white nationalist demonstrations, and and that has an effect on the feeling of belonging and safety of new arrivals in each of your communities. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that topic of community safety, and what are some of the best practices that you're seeing or that you might advise local governments and law enforcement agencies to undertake to improve the feeling of safety within your communities, especially for those people from diverse backgrounds?
So I think, again, the city of Bangor's police department has been very collaborative with the new Mainers. So in each orientation, community outreach officer will attend those meetings and will present themselves to the new families who arrived, talk to them about safety, about how they are supportive of them, and not to be afraid to ask, to reach out. And I thought that was one of the highlights of the orientation every single time, because they need to feel, they are safe. They need to feel. So I have not felt there was a pushback in our community. I felt the opposite. It was really very welcoming. And I want to remind you that it's still baby steps in Bangor. We have not seen an influx like in hundreds. It's just a few families who arrived, and there is a lot of enthusiasm in Bangor to welcome them. So we have not seen this pushback that other cities and communities experienced. So I can't talk to that yet, but I think the baby steps that our community has taken and the police department has taken, I think that is helping, and hopefully it's gonna make those new Mainers feel like, they are protected, they are safe, and they are welcomed. So we don't have that experience maybe that other municipalities like Lewiston and Portland, have. So we'll give it to you.
So for the city of Lewiston, Lewiston PD is being very intentional in wanting to hire diverse people to match the community. And additionally, they're implementing programs where cops can walk around like different parts of the neighborhood so they can have that one-on-one interaction, because sometimes people may feel like there's a lack of transparency, and there's a stigma with cops, especially with the history of the US. So they're doing their part to break down those barriers and getting to know people as individuals instead of working off of maybe like preconceived notions. So on their end, they're doing trainings and DEI trainings through me, and also trying to get to know the community before just always being associated with, oh, if I see a cop, a crime is happening, something bad is happening. Trying to make sure that they are known as people and not just somebody coming to take somebody away or associating with only with crime.
I think it's really important to denounce all types of hate speech to the public. And I think when you have representatives and city councilors and senators and governors, they have to do their job in saying that that does not exist in the municipalities that they govern. I think that's extremely important, especially since we saw a spike in it during COVID, with people having more and more time on their hands to be as hateful as they can be. And it was amazing to see city councilors and leaders saying that this is not the fabric of Maine and this is not the fabric of our culture. We've had immigration throughout the years, from the Catholic immigrants coming in to the Irish coming in, and this isn't new to us, and that hate won't survive here. Secondly, it's really important to have neighborhood community initiatives where people protect people. And sometimes that goes further than just using the police department to protect folks. And I think some communities are very aware of that type of neighborhood policing. You know, somebody's walking around saying, hey, what are you doing here? Or what's going on here, and just having an eye on their neighbors. And it's really interesting when you do that perspective where it's very inclusive. So it's not a certain type of neighbor that's alarming. It's just that we know our community and we've built our community around diversity, and therefore we will protect our community around that. When it comes to the police department, I think every culture, whether you are American or coming from a different country, has a certain type of relationship with the police department, good or bad. Some people come from backgrounds where police departments are military based, so it's not something that you call upon. And some people come from backgrounds where the police department has unfortunately oppressed their communities, so there's a fear there. And some people come from backgrounds where the police were extremely helpful. So engaging police in that conversation, I found to be extremely helpful what that looks like. And the city of Portland runs a fellowship program, and a few of the fellows got the opportunity, and they're all from diverse backgrounds, to go on ride-alongs with the police. And in that, there was a lot of shared learning of experience, not only from the fellows going on the ride-alongs, but from the PD as well. Getting that one-on-one 7-hour interaction with somebody from a diverse background to understand how their communities see policing and what they can do better. Those officers were able to take that back into the PD and say, you know, this is what I'm learning. This is what the community is saying, and this is what we can do better. And I always say that human to human connection, that reference point, is what actually changes the mind. The policy and the initiatives are always in writing, and they're very subjective, so they can be weaponized in any way. But once that bridge of connection is built, that's when stigma is truly broken.
Yeah, so just thinking about it's always interesting for tribal folks when we see anti-immigrant behavior or hate speech because it's never coming from us. So the folks that are perpetuating this hatred and these like stereotypes and you know, being unwelcoming, they are from immigrants. So we always like struggle with that irony. Just wanted to put that out there, and thinking about community safety, and I've agreed with so much of what's been said here about representation. Right now at Penobscot Nation, we have, I think, 4 police officers who are tribal members, and that's helped our community come such a long way in building that trust and feeling that humanity. And I think it probably puts them in a funny spot sometimes where they have to like hold a family member accountable. You know, everybody's cousins and knows everybody. But it's really helped our kids and a lot of our people be more comfortable with law enforcement, because even in our small communities, we have some of those same barriers to trusting law enforcement and those processes. And for us, a big piece of this puzzle is also continuously advocating for funds for our police departments. So when you get into the maze of federal funding for tribes, we're often on the chopping block, and there's a lot of you know, broken promises from the federal government in keeping their trust responsibility to our nation. So that's part of our community safety too, is making sure that the law enforcement has that funding and all that sort of thing.
Well, Ambassador Bryan, I was reminded of when people say, I think with the best of intentions, when they say something like, well, this is a nation of immigrants. We're all immigrants. You know, that's not inclusive entirely. So just one of those little uses of language that I think we use with the best of intentions, but it's not inclusive, right? Thank you all. I want to follow up on Melissa, you were specifically talking about neighborhood programs, right? And I think the point that law enforcement can and should be partners in making sure that our communities are safe for everybody, but they're not our only partners, and we shouldn't rely exclusively on law enforcement to do that. It's kind of a whole community effort. So in thinking about that and how to engage community members in programs and efforts around community safety, what are some best practices that you're aware of or that you've used maybe to educate community members about this need, or or develop new programs that would enhance community safety with the direct involvement of members of the community?
I can't say a lot has been done. I think, especially with the programs and initiatives that's coming out of the city, we're putting it in the hands of community leaders to engage their communities. So the specific program has 12 leaders representing all different types of communities, all different backgrounds and all different ethnicities. It's almost like the United Nations, but it's functioning. And with that, they do their own engagement. So they challenge like the police department to say, you know, we need more community officers. You have a good maybe 5 in these locations, but you're missing these locations. And what else can we do? Can you come to our communities and have your community officers come there? What does representation look like in these communities? And also, not everything has to be extremely heavy. So community gardening is one of the best things to do. Community sustainability acts where people get to show up and do something in group settings that is beneficial for their neighborhood tends to quiet the fear and show people as people. So I always say, you know, you want to educate folks, but you also want to create this environment of free and organic integration so people can just see their likeness. Um, anybody want to add anything? I'll just pass it along.
Yeah, there is not much I can add to that. I think lack of representation in the city of Bangor, I mean, it's obvious. We don't have much diversity within the police department, and I think it's also blamed on who apply, like applicants. Maybe the more diverse populations arrive to Bangor, maybe we will, in the near future, will be seeing more diversity within the police department that we have right now. And also about neighborhood policing. And I don't think of it as policing. If it is a police officer, it becomes like a neighborhood friendship. I feel and that's what used to be in the city of Bangor, but because of shortage in staff, so they had to allocate those officers to work in other areas where they are needed. But definitely neighborhood, I mean, even when we say community, even if they are not police, even if they're not a part of the police department, but they become like support system for other families who are living in that area. And that reminds me of neighbors to the immigrant families who settled in Bangor. Neighbors have been amazing and very supportive. I have seen those fabulous families supporting their neighbors, asking them if they are okay, if they need anything, if they feel safe, if they want to accompany them when they go to places. So it has been, again, Bangor is still different. I feel like the perspective about what's going on is very different from Portland, but I'm taking notes.
Excellent. Thank you all. So we know also, unfortunately, that within each of all of our communities, there is some pushback, right? Anytime something changes, there's going to be some pushback. So I guess I'm curious if any of you have kind of practices that you've seen work particularly well in local government or community responses to pushback that you could offer our audience.
I think it's important to create a community of people around you that are like-minded individuals, because when you have pushback, and I learned this personally just being in the DEI field, it can feel a little isolating. You have to create a team of people who want to see the same things you want and who have the same vision you want, in order to be able to, one, speak life into you when you're feeling super drained and you don't want to do the job anymore, and also to just start strategizing with you. What's next? What can I do? Because it's easy to be alone, but I think more work gets done when you're in collaboration with others, especially like-minded individuals.
Okay, so we're gonna get a little bit deep here, y'all. Bear with me. So working in the DEI space for about 2 years, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of political pushback. It swings with the tides, whether you're a Republican or you're a liberal, and you're finding out the footing to make everything feel equitable on both sides for these diverse populations that are coming in. So everything's a problem to everyone at some point, and you can never make everybody happy, but you just have to do, the right things that show equity. When it comes to strategic thinking is something that dawned on me pretty heavily. And when I say strategic thinking, I mean going back into history. What I found in Maine was there was a lack of deep rooted historical context to the patterns that we were seeing. So people thought this was like new. And I'm sitting here being from the South. I'm like, no, y'all, this is not new. This is how the South works. And now we're seeing it a little bit up north, but it's very covert instead of overt, right? But the same coded language is used in the policies, the same type of language is used in oppression, except it's tweaked in different ways. And then we have new communities who are being exposed to this type of either xenophobia and racism in very nuanced ways, and they're trying to figure it out. But while they're trying to figure out, they lose the context that it's happened before. It's almost like a blueprint has been created that they can pull from to say, okay, you're saying this, but this is exactly what happened in the 1960s. And we haven't moved too far from there. So how do we not let this happen again? How do we not duplicate history? And I feel like that is essentially a heavy part of what's missing. And then we also have this huge conversation about system work, and system work is pretty daunting. It's pretty overwhelming. Changing systems seems like a hard job to do for one person. But for example, in the cohort, the first day we talked about power dynamics and where sources of power comes from. And that's extremely important to point out, because when you're talking about systems, you have to be extremely specific on the system that you're trying to change. When you're extremely specific on the system that you're trying to change, that's an easy one to do. A big system is too big. A small system you can do one by one at the same time. And how do we point that out? And when we did that exercise, people began to notice that the systems at play were just not as clear as they thought it was. And they began to like read between the lines of coded language, read between the lines of how organizational processes get to the way they are, and who the gatekeepers are and who the gate openers are. And I think that's the key and fundamental way for talking against pushback. Also, one final thing, when you look throughout history, especially in the 1960s when we were doing the civil rights movement, there was a huge conversation around economic opportunity for America, and how we have conversations that don't lead to political discussions, but lead to economic mobility for all Americans. And I think those conversations are extremely lost these days, but those were the conversations that were had that won the change by saying, if you allow these folks to enter into the workforce, what can that do for the fabric of America? How do we gain? How do we become stronger in that type of diversity? And those are the conversations that open doors. So in my work, I strategically think about systems change and strategizing around not attacking, because that's a little aggressive, but combating conversations when it comes to a lack of diversity by talking about economic opportunity.
Yeah, I can think of this as two parts. One of them is changing policies, as you said, but the other one is education. How can we push back is by educating the community. And I think the city of Bangor, and I'm not talking about the city itself, I'm talking about institutions in the city of Bangor working on education, educating the public about immigrants and their contributions. And I would like to talk about Maine Multicultural Center work in the last couple of years. Every month there is an education forum which highlights the contribution of an immigrant who has been living in the state of Maine, not necessarily in the Bangor area, but highlighting their work, their contribution, living in Maine, their experience. And And every time there are more people who are attending those meetings, and I think this is one way of informing the community about their neighbors who are moving to be their neighbors, moving to Bangor. So I feel education, again, it becomes like an important piece of pushing back on this. And it starts baby steps, but if you keep on doing this consistently, 1 month after another, for years, it's going to bring more awareness to our communities about our new neighbors. So this is part one, absolutely. And then we talk about the changing policies. That's where the city of Bangor, I think, creating a committee. We call it, and I used to chair this one, the Advisory Committee on Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights. So the mission of this committee is to change policies, ordinances, create a room for more diversity, whether in recruitment, in training, and creating this sense of belonging and inclusion for community members of different backgrounds, regardless of their color, race, ethnicity, sex, gender. So ability, all of these. So that's the main mission of this committee. On the other part of this is to address oppression within the system and to try to hire maybe more diverse population. Talking about the police department, hopefully we'll get there one day, fire department. So just create more diversity within the hiring process. I want to also talk about our education system within this Bangor School Department. And here we have Marwa and we have Dana. And I mean, all of like their efforts in creating more diversity in the school system has been fantastic. And I think their efforts are, the fruits of their efforts are being seen and felt now, changing curriculum to make it more diverse as well. So all of this, I feel education also starts within our schools, our children, help them understand and be accepting. So when they go back home, even if their parents are not accepting, they will hear a different story. They will hear a different way of talking about their neighbors. So I feel there are more like, more layers to this, at least for us in the city of Bangor.
Thank you so much. All right, I have one more question I'm going to pose you, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So get those questions ready. This is your warning. So we've talked a lot, and you all have highlighted the importance of partnerships in doing this work. And we've talked about education. We've talked about law enforcement. One important set of potential partners we haven't yet talked about is employers. And presumably many of the people in this room are employers. And so I want to ask you, what are some of the ways that employers and local governments and communities can work together to create a greater sense of belonging in our communities across the state?
So I once spoke at an HR conference back in 2021, and I showed this clip of this video from, I think, 1962. It was like a black and white video, and they were talking about integration, and they were getting a group of Black people into the workforce. And in the boardroom of this conversation were all white men, and they were all stating why this can't happen, the problems that this would cause, how people would feel uncomfortable, and how people would quit if they allowed Black people to start working, and where would the Black people sit, and where would they eat, and what would this do to their bottom line, and nobody was gonna work for the organization anymore. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's literally what they were thinking. And I was sitting there and I'm just like, wow. Organizations or employers have huge impact on what we see and who we retain in our communities. The lead in this clip gave a great speech about how this has nothing to do with race at all, but this is how the organization should be functioning. And he, without a doubt, thought this was the right move, even though the federal government would have fined them if they didn't do it. But they pushed through it anyway. And in Portland, at least I can speak for the city of Portland, there's been strong initiatives to bring about integration into the city, but not about integration only, not about doing the HR work, but to do the leadership work. Because there is notice that when leaders are extremely responsive to diversity, they increase the amount of diversity in their organizations. And when they do that, we bring in more diversity. People are very timid to come to Portland, and majority white state, because one, they don't want to suffer from oppression, and two, where are they going to work? And three, if they do work, are they going to be paid equitably? Are they going to be paid the same as the white employers beside them? And these conversations are what's in their head most of the time. And are they going to be treated fairly? At some point, there was a little bit of a pushback from BIPOC communities about entering into white workforce spaces, because they thought they were going to be treated poorly based off of accents, based off of bias, based off of what they perceived incompetence, that based off of being devalued. And they wanted to stay in this little group, which was problematic because this left no room for economic mobility. And I was just like, this is a huge issue, not for organizations, but employers at the top. How are you showcasing diversity? How are you talking about culture in your institution? And once you do that, I think it opens the door for people to want to try to break into historically white institutions. And once that happens, once there's one happy representative, like Davine said, word of mouth hits, and diverse folks are begging to come to these organizations because they feel the sense of safety there.
So I think before you start seeking out diverse places, you need to really look at your workplace culture. If you are in a predominantly white place, you have a super high turnover, everybody's miserable, and you're not addressing that, but you're like, I want more diverse people to come work here. You need to figure out what you have going on first before you want to encourage somebody to want to work there, because what's the selling point if everybody's quitting every 3 months? So addressing the workplace culture, how do people empower check in on you? Do people care? Do people thank you for the work that you do you feel valued? Do you feel appreciated? Because people always think that DI is only a race issue, but it's so much bigger than that, because belonging is also a part of DI. And if you feel like you don't belong somewhere, you're not going to stay there for long. You're not going to want to climb up a ladder if there is one at your company. So I think focusing on the people that you're currently working with, really checking on their happiness and their mental well-being, and making them feel like, hey, you're not just a number to us. We care about you. When that is sorted, when you do the internal surveys, when you address those issues, when you feel like people are truly genuinely content in their work, that's when you can open the doors and try to have diverse people and people from diverse backgrounds.
Thank you both. I think this is amazing, and I can't keep up with you're talking about culture in the workplace. we have not had this yet in Bangor much. I think at Northern Light, I don't want to mention names, but definitely there is a lot of activity going on to address culture and diversity within the workplace. And I know that they have achieved steps towards that and addressing all of the issues that come along with mostly white, dominating culture. So I know there are steps taking place now. University of Maine, it's already very diverse. And I think you always know that if you go to Orono, that's where all diversity, school, classrooms, but it's coming to Bangor. So we're seeing that in Bangor. In the workplace, other than the hospital, and I mean, it's not diverse truly. It's not diverse. We don't have that yet. The immigrant families who arrive when they are professionals, like that's Northern Light, that's University of Maine, but immigrant families who arrive with skills, so they are people in the trade. So that's the challenge now, how to get them to have employment where employers are not used to that. So that's we're talking about the culture, right? I mean, they are not used to having employees who are not white or employees who don't speak English. So it has been a challenge for us, and I'm not talking about Bangor, City of Bangor, I'm talking about us in our organization as Maine Multicultural Center to reach out. So it's individual efforts to reach out to employers to establish those partnerships and to present to them about our work. I personally will go with an immigrant family and meet with the employer, and I try to explain to them. And then I take with me someone who knows them, another white person who knows them, and to establish this connection. So it's always individual efforts. We are not at that piece where we're addressing the system. We're not there yet. So it's important, again, maybe to know how it's going to look like in the future and how we need more and further discussions about the culture in the workplace.
Well, firstly, the future of municipal government is very bright with these three brilliant human beings involved. So, yes. Any questions from the audience? I will bring you the microphone. Oh, I'm almost that small.
Thank you all for taking the time to talk with all of us today. It's been awesome hearing all of your perspectives. And I am curious about what is your favorite part of what you do? And do you have any success stories in the back of your mind that you might be able to just share with us quickly so that we can hear a little more about that work?
So I love what I do. I have been known to stir the pot since I was 2, and I love a good challenge and rising to the occasion. So I think this job presents that in the most humane way, and it's definitely probably one of my love passion projects to do. I don't ever feel like I'm working. I'm always feeling like I'm just creating pathways. So with that, I feel like there's been tons of successful anecdotes, whether it was DEI training with the city of Lewiston. I remember one specific training where I was trying really hard when you're talking about DEI work to try to engage folks who could care less about DEI. And they're just like, this does not impact my day to day. And I was like, how do I make these folks have empathy? So we have our wonderful public works department that is all white, blue collar males who are just like, this is way beyond my scope. Why do I care? When we're talking about women in workforce, are just like, well, my wife is a nurse and she makes more than me. So obviously there is no issue here. The challenge became how do I get them to engage? So we did this one really hilarious to me activity, but it was very important in education. We played this game of equity basketball. So every public works person had an identity. They were either an Asian female who was pregnant, they were a Latin American woman, they were a Native American man who has worked for a certain amount of time in some field, and they all had this identity to play. And I gave them the opportunity to just sit with that identity. And then they played equity basketball. So the idea was, with your identity, how much does the American system pay you? And then there were 2 who were like white males. So it was interesting because we had one man who was this Asian pregnant woman, and he had to stand in a position that says, if I launch it from here, I will make it. So I should be really close because I'm a woman and I'm of Asian descent. So I should be closer to the goalpost. And I was like, absolutely not. And the way this man got upset at me and he was upset because there was a program manager, his title was a chief director, a program manager, white male, that made the same amount of money as him. And he was just like, absolutely not. My feet are tired. I am pregnant. I'm not even from this country. And I am a chief director. I should be right here. And that experience alone got them to understand system play and equity play. And the conversation that stemmed from that was just one of the, I think for me, it was one of the most impactful conversations I've had with folks. who never get to engage in this type of heady work the same way. I have tons, but that was just one.
My favorite part of my role is getting to speak with the youth, because a lot of the times, realistically, nobody really cares about City Hall unless you're registering your car and then you never think about it again. But getting to speak to the youth about my experience growing up in Lewiston, and them telling me like, "Oh, Davine, you're so inspiring. I kind of want to work for City Hall one day. I don't know what I'll do, but if you can do it, I can do it." And I think that's very sweet, because a lot of the times young people don't have enough people speaking life into them, especially if you're from a certain background, or how you were raised and things like that. So just me bridging the gap between the barriers, working for City Hall and talking to them about it is accessible, and I do believe in you, and you can even go beyond City Hall, honestly. I think that makes the job really worth it.
I think for me, being on the city council speaks volume. People of Bangor, I think they truly, I mean, they voted for me, and it was a rough race. And I think to be there, it means there are people in the city of Bangor who appreciate diversity and who want to see that Muslim woman, hijabi, being on the council to represent them. They see value in me being on the council. And I think that is really important to highlight here. So I feel being there representing the people of Bangor is really something that is very dear to my heart, and it gives me feeling of more responsibility, even though I know it is a responsibility, but I just feel even higher responsibility that I have to be up to their expectations and to do the job to the best of my ability. And I enjoy every single minute of it, even though it can be very challenging at times, very stressful. You never get what you want. Most of the time, you don't get what you want, and it's a fight all the time for what I feel is right, the right thing to do. And it's funny because whenever I meet one of the constituents, and they will say, "Oh, I voted for you," and I say, "I hope I did not disappoint in those 3 years." And like, "Oh no, you're fine." So it's a joy to be there. Like, and when you talk about also representation, I'm there. Maybe I represent one, not even one. Like, there are no Muslim families, maybe just very few, you can count them. So, but I still feel strong in who I am there, being a Muslim woman. And I think now with more immigrant families moving, some of them are from Syria. I'm from Syria as well. And they look at me, and this is a role model for them. And I see many of them, like those young girls, are thinking about what they want to do in the future. There is hope. They can be where I am in the future. So I think there's a joy in everything I do, in every way I go about with it. So it's just rewarding every single day of my life. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll jump in here too. I think the best part of my work, my older two daughters are 15 and 17, and I'm sure they think I'm really lame in a lot of ways, but they think my job is so awesome. So it's great being with them. And I have a quick success story that ties in a lot of what we're talking about. So a long time ago, like 2015, Skowhegan was the last school in Maine to keep their Indian mascot. And, they did change it before we passed the law, but they hung on for a really long time. So there was this series of school board meetings where tribal folks were meeting with the school board and different folks in the community. And they had assembled this group called Skowhegan Indian Pride. So this group in the town was trying to keep the mascot, and they had propped up as the leader of their group a homeschooled high school student. He was like 17 years old, and he would stand outside with a sign saying, something like "Let us be Indians," or "We're Indians too," or something to that effect, outside all the meetings that we had. So there was one big, messy public forum where I tried to speak. The school board didn't want me to speak. They sent a police officer to take me from the podium. It was a dramatic thing. So after that meeting, he approached me, and I wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he said, "You being here and being honest with us and seeing the pain in your eyes tonight when you couldn't be heard has completely changed my heart. And I agree with you, and I don't want to lead this movement anymore." And that was so powerful that a young person who had no doubt been very much pushed into this role he was in, was able to step outside of that, feel that shared humanity, and come around and really embrace something much larger than him or me. So together, that felt like a lot of progress. It was great to pass the law, and there's been a lot of huge, fancy things I've gotten to do, but those little moments, human to human, really stick with you.
Thank you all. I think we have time. Well, we'll try to fit 2 questions in. I think I saw this hand first. Are you sure?
A more daunting question, and I'm sorry to get kind of heavy, but I do want to understand how each of you, and I kind of know Bangor already, but when there are white supremacists who really push this fear mongering and try to scare, use all these scare tactics and to try to disrupt or interrupt this work that we're doing and try to create a roadblock for the community inclusion. What is the response? I know that we received hate mail in Bangor and we took it head on. I know that a gentleman, a wonderful gentleman who was a DEI director, resigned over, this fear mongering and a threat, and obviously we all care for our families and want to protect our families. And so what is the response from Lewiston and Portland in interrupting that and really making sure that all community members feel safe and have that sense of belonging?
So I can speak to 2 incidences. One that happened during my time in Lewiston, and that's when there was a anti-Semitism parade that with white nationalists. That it wasn't really a parade. I think it was just 4 guys in hoodies walking around. But it had enough of an impact. So what the city did in response was to vocalize how this wasn't what Lewiston stood for, and even getting them to do that was hard. You had a mayor who believed in those words, and you had a council who was a little bit lukewarm to saying something so bold, but it was still done. And then after that, they were like, okay, we fixed the problem. Not knowing that after these men showed up, women were getting their hijabs pulled in the street. There was just strong acts of violence that took place because some people felt extremely emboldened to act hatefully. So one woman in particular, her name is Hebo Omer, and she's just amazing. She comes up to me and she's like, Melissa, this is what's happening to my community and nobody is doing anything. And I try to call the police and they don't listen to me. So I said, you know what? I know who the chief is. We're going to walk you right to him and you're going to tell him to his face what is happening to the community. And you're going to say it with as much anger as you're saying to me. And I'm not taking it personally, but he might. So we did that. And they together figured out a way to strategically create a call system for those who were being impacted by small hate crimes and have those voices heard. In the city of Portland, when the rise happened in about 2020, and I think I always take this with a grain of salt because those who hate the most are just probably 5%, not even that, of the population. They're like a minute number. They just have very squeaky wheels that we should not oil. So when that happened in 2020, I think they did the same thing, this huge initiatives, this huge pushback. But when it comes to fear mongering from a 0.1%, it's extremely hard to attack because 1, they're a small group. So how much fear do you want to give to your community? And 2, how do we acknowledge this in a safe way to say that we are doing the best we can without scaring the public, right? So you're always riding a slippery slope of like keeping it in container to say, we're addressing this internally because we don't want to fear the public unless it's an actual fear. And if it is an actual fear, I think municipalities need to do a good job of follow-up work, not attacking it with one primary solution, but making sure there's like a 6-month check-in to see how your community is thriving and surviving.
So because Melissa was the first DEI, she kind of handled a bunch of the brunt work of everything. She kind of paved the way because her experience with like the city council and just the time you were DI too it was a lot harder. And I haven't personally experienced like super intense white supremacy. I have I have little issues here and there in terms of like gathering support, but I think that I'm in um I'm in a good place right now. And also I've only had this job for 6 months. So, you know.
It's as Marwa said, there was this incident, but the city of Bangor they addressed it, and it was on the council, and it was September 11, and it's just someone who I think they went on Zoom and they had multiple accounts, and when it was their turn to say something, it was hateful speech, and they cut them off immediately. But it left us shaking. Like, someone had the audacity to come forward and speak to us this way. I thought it was, especially on 9/11. So I thought it was very disruptive. It was concerning, to say the least. So for me, I sat there. I'm like, that's not what we're doing today. Like today, it is a day of celebration of unity. Like we want to celebrate our unity, and to remember those who lost their lives on September 11. It should not be a space for hateful speech. And I think we had a lot of discussions afterwards on city level and how to address those in the future. But we felt the best way to do it while maintaining free speech is just cut them off when they start, because there is no other way to predict what's going to happen. Everyone has the right to say something when they want to express their views. But once they start, you can realize, oh my gosh, like what are they talking about? So it's not allowed on that venue. But yeah, it was rough, but I think the city of Bangor addressed that properly.
This is the real last one. For real, for real.
And I think it'll be a good one. So this is a multi-layered question, so you can take either part, and I would hope that you two, Ambassador, would answer as well. So DEIB work is already very difficult. We know that. We know we got to stay together. We know we got to stick to our circles so that we can keep empowering each other. But working for government is a different flavor of difficult. And I would go into saying, so it could be soul sucking, or you give your soul. Yes, it's good, but you give a lot of yourself. And so I guess I have two questions, like I said, multi-layered. The first part of this is, what is something that you do or that you can give to some other DEIB workers, knowing that y'all are at the top level of stress and soul suckiness? What's one thing that you do aside from keeping your circle closed to replenish yourself, to continue to go when the pushback comes? What is something that you do that keeps you from sticking in the work when the pushback comes? And I guess the second part of this question is, we know about the successes, but when one of your initiatives or programs goes awry or goes wrong or doesn't go the way you expected it, or your outcomes are different, what's something that you have done or something that you can tell us that would encourage the rest of your community? Because when you mess up or when something messes up, it's not just you in your office, it's your whole town or your whole community. So what's something that you maybe have experienced where you had an example where it didn't go well, but you kept your community in the inclusivity game? And that's it.
Thank you for the question, Aisha. Two parts. So in this city of Lewiston, there were moments of extreme pushback, extreme pushback. And I actually worked a lot with Aisha at the time. And one, for example, was around white supremacy in ERG groups. And it was in the public school systems where basically they wanted, a group of BIPOC students to meet or staff to meet and talk about issues. And for some reason, it rubbed our council the really, like a really, really bad way. And they created a draft that had just such biased language and they wanted the school system to sign off on it and say, this is what we value, even though the council had no authority over the school system at all. And I remember it coming through my email chain, and I was mortified. And I was like, there's no way this can pass. And I'm Catholic, so there's only two ways to acknowledge people. You either blame them or you shame them. So I was just like, I only have two things to do here. Why don't we attack both? So in that draft, I went ahead and redlined everything that was absolutely inappropriate. They quoted Lyndon B. Johnson incorrectly and all of these things to try to make this case for why any DEI initiative was inappropriate. And then I sent it back knowing that somebody in the community was going to do a FOA. Everybody loves that. Everybody loves getting access to government information. And when that was done, the public was notified that this document was going to be put out to the school systems. And at that time, I remember calling Aisha and I said, we're going to a city council meeting. I need backup. This is on TV. And the community needs to see the amount of hatred that happens internally and exactly what they're fighting for. And I remember Aisha was just like, I'll be there, girl. I'll be there. She's like, I'm coming. And at that point, though it's hard to do what we do, you kind of stand as a martyr for the community because you really want them aware of what they're fighting for at a constant basis. So when Aisha showed up, having that community support gave me enough gumption to say, okay, we're going to go toe to toe on this issue. It never passed, right? The shame worked, the blame worked, thank God. But that's just an example. Also, a secondary thing is creating support within your municipality. I really push for municipalities to adopt some type of a natural helpers program. It's a national program that the city of Portland has adopted and has run it through a fellowship this year. And what happens when you're doing DEI work, you don't carry the load. You almost create this army of community leaders to raise their hand when you're tired, and you watch their impact, and it pushes you to continue on. And these community leaders make sure that they represent all community, white, Black, Asian, Latin, etc., because those represented voices together have impact, even larger impact than your council can. Can you imagine every representative community coming to a city council meeting and saying, we've agreed that this is what you did wrong? Like, it just shuts the room down. So I really push for municipalities to look into doing that work and seeing what happens when you build up communities to share resources, education, insights in your specific municipality and problem solve cases in real time. It's extremely effective. And for the DEI work, it lives on without the stigma, right?
The question was, how do I take care of myself? Okay, so I think I don't like over identifying myself with my job, just because with DEI work and how finicky it can be and how sometimes you feel like you have a job, sometimes you piss off city council and you're like, oh my gosh, I might be out of a job. I think, who am I outside of being a DEI specialist? Focusing on my goals outside of work, my hobbies, spending time with the people who care about me, and basically telling myself like, okay, I work from 8 to 4:30. I'm not staying in this office any longer than that. I'm not overextending myself. I have to keep my boundaries. I'm not answering emails on the weekend. You're going to see me Monday through Friday because that's what I'm paid to do. So I think remembering that I am more than my job and focusing on the things that I love outside of it really keeps me level-headed. And then the second part, well, no, because I can't, because I'm too new. I haven't started any new initiative yet, but some things are in the works. Hopefully